Back when the Sega Genesis was launched in 1989, it was quite common to include a pack-in game for free with new console hardware. It may sound funny today, but the inclusion of Sega's Altered Beast was a pretty big deal if you were a fan of arcade games. Altered Beast had only been released a year prior as a coin-op for Sega's System 16 board, so it was mighty impressive to see the Genesis doing a game so well that was so new. And what a port it was! While it was missing a few effects here and there and the animation was a tad less impressive, Altered Beast still had great sprites, detailed backgrounds that were very close to the original, and still had two-player co-op at the same time. Even more exciting was the inclusion of parallax scrolling that even the arcade version lacked. For all the hate and dismissal that it receives today, this was a fun title that was easy to get into and was quite welcome as my first Genesis game I ever owned. While most Sega fans are quite familiar with the Genesis port, there existed additional console options on the Famicom, Master System, and the Japanese PC Engine that some of you may not know about. That's right, the Genesis wasn't the only option to play this classic. Heck, on the PC Engine there was not only a 4 megabit HuCard release, but there was also a PC Engine CD version right around the same time. In this episode, we are going to take a look at these alternatives, see how they fared against the arcade and Genesis versions, and decide if they are worth a play today. Did they turn out better than expected, or did they show their platforms in a profoundly negative light? Let's find out. In pretty much every version, our story begins with the evil demon Neves kidnapping Athena, the daughter of the mighty Zeus himself. Desperate to get his beloved child back, Zeus calls upon a fallen warrior to defeat Neves and return Athena safe and sound. The arcade game begins with the unforgettable phrase, "Arise from your grave," and the gameplay begins. Unfortunately, the PC Engine HuCard, Famicom, and Master System editions lack any real voice work at all. Given its 1988 roots, that gameplay is pretty basic no matter which version you choose. Once you have control over the revived Centurion, you only have a couple of basic attacks. You get a punch that can be pulled off both high and low, as well as a kick. You can jump and jump attack, which pretty much sums up all our warrior can really do. At least at first. After beating down a few enemies, you'll notice a pack of rather large two-headed wolves will bear down on your position. Target the blue one and he'll release a spirit ball. Collect it and our hero grows in size and strength. First a little, then a lot. When you collect the third spirit ball, the hero is transformed into a powerful beast with special abilities. These beasts change stage by stage. First starting off as a werewolf, before moving on to a were-dragon, a were-bear, a were-tiger, and finally the golden werewolf, the most powerful of them all. The extra abilities of these were-beasts allow you to quickly and decisively cut down your enemies with next to no trouble at all. Those enemies range from simple zombies to flying devils that attack you from above, to the powerful and menacing Grave Master that can empty a life bar in seconds. Neves will make an appearance during the stage, and once you have the power of the Altered Beast, he too transforms, but he goes all out by becoming some hideous monster hell-bent on your destruction. Once you defeat these guys, you are robbed of your spirit balls and reduced to your original form as you move on to the next stage. There are a few small differences between every version. The PC Engine HuCard takes after the arcade the most, with a fairly accurate run of stages, enemies, bosses, and gameplay. Due to the original 2-button interface of the PC Engine controller, you have to press up on the D-pad to jump, which does affect gameplay. Fortunately, like the arcade and Genesis versions, Altered Beast on the PC Engine is a 2-player experience. The Sega Master System version is similar to the arcade as well, but lacks the stage with the werebear, making it the shortest version of Altered Beast among the console offerings. There is also a big change with the spirit balls. You only need 2 in this one to morph into the Altered Beast. Like the PC Engine edition, the 2 action buttons on the Sega Master System controller means that in order to jump, there is an alternative that you must deal with. Here you must press both attack buttons together to perform a jump, and then both buttons together and up for the larger jump. And yes, this indeed does have yet another negative impact on the gameplay. It's also just one player. The Famicom version is perhaps the most interesting among the 8-bit console versions in terms of content. Aside from having similar levels to the arcade, it also adds 3 additional stages not in any other version of the game. Along with those areas come 3 new beast forms, a lion, a shark, and a phoenix. That makes this version of Altered Beast the longest of any rendition that was based on the original arcade. As with the other 2 8-bit console releases, the 2-button interface on the NES pad meant that you'll be using up to jump, double tapping it to get the higher variation. And just like the Sega Master System edition, this is also a one-player game. I was always pretty impressed with the graphical capabilities of the PC Engine. Call it 8-bit or 16-bit, I don't really care. The bottom line was, this hardware can make a damn good looking game. And unfortunately, Altered Beast isn't one of them. This is a decidedly average looking affair that has nowhere near the polish that Genesis received. And it's across the board. The color is less impressive, the backgrounds are much simpler and lack any parallax at all. Everything just comes off less impressive and lacking the same impact made on Sega's 16-bit console. This was actually surprising given the color capabilities of the PC Engine. Fortunately, it's not a complete loss. The sprites remain large, it mimics some of the scaling effects seen in the arcade, and the bosses are pretty much spot on. But no matter which way you try and paint this narrative, the end result is the same. Altered Beast on the PC Engine is a very tame port of the original arcade when it comes to visuals. And let's face it, the graphics were a huge part of this game's appeal. You water down how it looks and you are left with a very short game with some very simple play mechanics. A side-by-side of the Genesis version really tells the tale of just how depressingly average this game looks. The Genesis screens have more detail, the color is more bold, and everything pops with a vibrance that is missing in every single area of the PC Engine. You'll also notice more sprite flicker in the 2-player mode on the PC Engine. NEC Avenue handled the port, and while it's not the worst thing on the hardware visually, it certainly should have been so very much more. But as average as the PC Engine may look, it's light years ahead of the awful Sega Master System release. Good night, man, is this game a travesty. While it does have some large characters, it completely lacks the beautiful color seen in many games for this hardware. Everything looks like it's made up of a palette of no more than half a dozen colors at most. And to make matters worse, the entire thing runs at a choppy, poorly animated pace that makes it a chore to play. My previous statement remains. You take away Altered Beast's presentation and you cripple the experience. But this goes a step further with visuals that actually make playing it more difficult. The Master System was no stranger to taking an IP that was also on the Genesis and making it its own. No such thing here. This is a poor attempt at mimicking an arcade experience that comes off ugly and running just terrible. I think this would have been so much better as a complete overhaul, similar to something like Castle of Illusion. On the Famicom, Altered Beast is the ugliest of the 8-bit console releases. Tiny sprites, terrible color, and just an overall sense of everything being a barren wasteland. It does run fairly well and the animation is surprisingly smooth, but that still doesn't hide its ugliest moments. It's also bordered by a massive information panel that takes up half the screen. Even on the NES, this one is rather poor in the graphics department. It's certainly no Ninja Gaiden or Castlevania. Most of what you'll hear in Altered Beast sounds decent on the PC Engine. Some of the sound effects are a bit rough, but the music holds up very well. The biggest issue for me is the lack of voice samples. There is no classic "Arise from your grave" in the beginning, no power up when you get a spirit ball, there's no "Welcome to your doom" when Neff transforms. Even the beast transformation sounds a bit broken. There has been speech in other PC Engine games before, and I really feel it was something that added to the overall atmosphere of this experience. Its exclusion definitely takes away something. Both the Famicom and Sega Master System editions are missing most of the voices as well. You do get the power up line on the Master System, but that's about it. Let's have a listen to a few of the music tracks from each version to see what you think. Altered Beast was never a particularly deep game in any of its forms, so let's not entertain any illusions that these games had a lot to live up to in terms of gameplay. For the most part, the core is intact in all of them. It feels like Altered Beast and represents a similar environment and art style. You'll face the familiar enemies, bosses, and you'll do it as the same werebeast you know and love. It's true the visuals are toned down quite a bit in every one of these, but for what it's worth, they are Altered Beast. But as much as I'd like to believe the core arcade experience was nothing special, there are still expectations here that go unmet. While the cutbacks in graphics are certainly lamentable, it's the lack of options and the missing voice samples that hurt them the most. These will be seen as superficial to many of you, but such simple pleasures can make or break experiences like this. There are no difficulty adjustments here in any form, making all three of these offerings far more frustrating than the Genesis release right from the get-go. With no ability to tweak anything, you are left with a game that gives you few weapons against enemies, especially the bosses, that can kill you in seconds. That leaves the 8-bit versions in a rather precarious position. Coming from the arcade or Genesis versions, the Famicom, Sega Master System, and PC Engine releases feel shallow and lacking the same pedigree in terms of presentation, but they are also frustrating as hell on top of that. You can get used to this with extended play, of course, but with better versions out there, why would you even bother? As curious as I was about the HuCard release of Altered Beast on the PC Engine, I was absolutely stoked to play the CD version. I just knew this one would fix every issue I had with the card version, while adding some much needed extras to give this edition a personality all its own. Firing it up, I was met with the joyous options of story and a level of difficulty change. I was ready for some beautiful hand-drawn storyboards, so let's take a look at that first. Yep, you're seeing that right. A super blocky border and some poorly colored art ripped straight from the covers and arcade flyers from other versions. The voiceover is in Japanese, of course, and it's accompanied by music straight from the arcade. The difficulty setting lets you choose between normal and hard, and does seem to result in a better balanced experience. After a few tries, you'll get hit less, stay alive longer, and have fewer instances of being smashed by the bosses. But as you can see from the footage here, the CD version is very similar in terms of its visuals. The backgrounds are still quite subdued in both detail and color, so you'll get very little in the way of visual improvement. There are some changes in some of the ancillary art, and Stage 2 looks quite a bit better with a darker backdrop, but overall this is not a huge leap in graphics over what we saw on the card. The sound and music represent a mixed bag as well. While the voice samples I missed in the card version have returned, they seem to come at the expense of a CD-based soundtrack. Yep, you get virtually the same chiptunes as before. This takes away one of the largest bonuses of CD technology at the time, a killer soundtrack. And if everything remained equal from there, I'd call this one a letdown and move on. But in its transition to the CD format, Altered Beast loses something I simply cannot forgive. It's two-player co-op. Yep, that's right. The CD version is a single-player game only. This is absolutely absurd and a massive omission. The very core of the fun of this was its multiplayer, and to have it stripped away leaves us with a hollow, empty conversion that deserves no praise at all. I wasn't expecting arcade perfection, but what's here is just not worth the time or effort needed to play it. One final note. This game has a problem with anything that uses a system card above 1.0. This manifests into beast transformations and you cannot finish the game normally. So if you have something with a Super CD card as standard or built in, it's essentially broken.
Welcome to your doom.
Altered Beast was certainly a game of its time. It relied heavily on flashy visuals and lots of voice work to pull you into an arcade experience you typically couldn't get at home. This was a big reason the Genesis release was so popular at the time with its fans. It recreated that arcade feel very closely, overshadowing its short playtime and simple play mechanics. But this leaves us with 4 8-bit console releases that can't match the same level of quality. They all look significantly downgraded from the Genesis edition in terms of visuals, and all but the PC Engine HuCard lacks two-player co-op entirely. That leaves us in a position to judge these ports a bit more harshly than we otherwise would have. They all have the same shortcomings of the arcade, plus a number of new ones. That doesn't leave much to recommend, even if the core gameplay remains quite playable in most of them. For those of you interested, Altered Beast also appeared on a number of home computers where it also had some fairly mixed results. I've only messed around with these on an emulator, well after the fact, so I can't give you any real definitive answer whether any of them are any good or not. I can tell you this of the 8-bit console releases. If you aren't playing the arcade original, stick with the Genesis port for the best console experience possible. Everything else just leaves you wanting more. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.